Good day everyone, my name is Carmen Arbaca. Today I am going to discuss the assigned topic entitled the Mesopotamian Civilization and their contribution. So before we are going to discuss the Mesopotamian Civilization, let us first identify how does the Mesopotamia word was formed. The word Mesopotamia is formed from the ancient words meso, meaning between or in the middle of, and potamos, meaning river. Situated in the fertile valleys between the Tigris and Euphrates River, the region is now home to modern-day Iraq, Kuwait, Turkey, and Syria. It is part of the Fertile Crescent, an area also known as Cradle of Civilization, for the number of innovations that arose from the early societies in this region, which are among some of the earliest known human civilizations on Earth. And now, what is Mesopotamia civilization? So, Mesopotamia civilization is a region of Southeast Asia in the Tigris and Euphrates River system that benefited from the area's climate and geography to host the beginning of human civilization. Mesopotamia is also defined by a changing succession of rising bodies from different areas and cities that seized control over a period of thousands of years. Humans first settled in Mesopotamia in the Paleolithic era. By 14,000 BC, people in the region lived in small settlements with circular houses. 5,000 years later, these houses formed farming communities following the domestication of animals and the development of agriculture. Most notably, irrigation techniques that took advantage of the proximity of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Agricultural progress was the work of the dominant Obaid culture, which had absorbed the Halaf culture before it. This scattered agrarian community started in the northern part of the ancient Mesopotamian region and spread south, continuing to grow for several thousand of years until forming what modern humans would recognize as cities, which were considered the work of the Sumer people. The figure shows the map of Mesopotamia. Speaking of Sumer, Sumer civilization was an ancient civilization founded in the Mesopotamian region of the Fertile Crescent situated between the Tigris and Euphrates River. Sumerians are known for their innovations in language, governance, architecture, and more. They are considered as the creators of civilization as modern humans understand it. Sumer was first settled by humans from 4,500 to 4,000 BC, though it is probable that some settlers arrived much earlier. This early population, known as the Obaid people, was notable for strides in the development of civilization such as farming and raising cattle, weaving textiles, working with carpentry and pottery, and even enjoying beer. Villages and towns were built around Obaid farming communities, and the people known as Sumerians were in control of the area by 3000 BC. Their culture was comprised of a group of city-states including Eridu, Nippur, Lagash, Kesh, Ur, and the very first true city, Uruk. At its peak around 2800 BC, the city had a population between 40,000 and 80,000 people living between its 6 miles of defensive walls, making it a contender for the largest city in the world. Each city-state of Sumer was surrounded by a wall, with villages settled just outside and distinguished by the worship of local deities. The rise and fall of Sumerians. The very first ruling body of Sumer that has historical verification is the first dynasty of Kish. The earliest ruler mentioned is Etana of Kish, who, in a document from the time, is credited as having stabilized all the lands. 1,000 years later, Etana would be memorialized in a poem that told of his adventures in heaven. The most famous of the early Sumerian rulers is Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, who took control around 2700 BC. And it's still remembered for his fictional adventures in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the first epic poem in history. Somewhere around 2600 BC, a power struggle erupted between the leaders of Kesh, Erech, and Ur, which set off a musical chairs scenario of rulers for the region for the next 400 years. The first conflict resulted in the kingdom of Awan seizing control and shifting the ruler's body outside of Sumer until the kingship was returned to the Kish. The Kesh kept control briefly until the rise of Uruk, king in Shakushana, whose brief dynasty was followed by Adabian conqueror Lugalanimundo, who held power for 90 years and is said to have expanded his kingdom up to the Mediterranean. Lugalanimundo also conquered the Gutian people who live in the eastern Iraqi mountains and who would later come to rule Sumer. In 2500s BC, the only woman to rule the Sumerians, Kubaba, took the throne. She is the only female listed on the Sumerian king list, which names all rulers of Sumer and their accomplishments. Kubaba's son, Puzor-Suen, eventually reigned, bringing in the 4th dynasty of Kish, following a brief ascendancy of Onzi, the first in the Akshak dynasty. This last Kish dynasty ruled for a century before Uruk. King Logal-Zagi is ruled for 25 years before Sargon took control. Sargon was an Akkadian whose past is shrouded in legends that some claim were ignited by Sargon himself, and Ur-Zababa was defeated by the king of Uruk. He was in turn overtaken by Sargon. Sargon followed that victory by seizing the cities of Ur, Umma, and Lagash and establishing himself as ruler. Sumerian tradition says that Sargon was the son of a gardener who rose to the position of cupbearer for Ur-Zababa, king of Kesh, which was not a servant position but a high official. Sargon ruled for 50 years, and after his death, his son Rimush faced widespread rebellion and was killed. Rimush's brother Manishtushu made the same fate. Sargon's grandson Naram-Sin took the throne in 2292 BC, and Naram-Sin considered himself divine and was leveled with charges of sacrilege. The Goshians invaded in 2193 BC following the reign of the last Akkadian king, Naram-Sin's son, Sharkali-Shari. Their era is marked by decentralized chaos and neglect. It was during Goshen reign that the grand city of Agade decayed into wreckage and disappeared from history. The final gasp of Sumer leadership came in 2100s BC when Otho-Higal, king of Ur, overthrew the Goshians. Ur-Nammu, the former governor of Ur, taking the throne, starting a dynasty that would rule for about a century. Ur-Nammu was known as a builder. Figurines from the time depict him carrying buildings materials, also did considerable work of constructing an organized and complicated legal code that is considered first in history. In 2004 BC, the Elamites stormed Ur and took control. At the same time, Amorites had begun overtaking the Sumerian population. The ruling Elamites were eventually absorbed into Amorite culture, becoming the Babylonians and marking the end of the Sumerians as a distinct body from the rest of Mesopotamia. The ancient Sumerians who flourished thousands of years ago built a civilization. Sumerians invented new technologies and perfected the large scale of use of existing ones. In the process, they transformed how humans cultivated food, built dwellings, communicated, and kept track of information and time. The Sumerians' innovation gradually spread and led to the development of the modern technologically advanced world that we live in today. The following are the contributions of Sumerian civilization. So first, we have mass-produced pottery. Sumerians were the first to develop the turning wheel, a device which allowed them to mass-produce it, that enabled them to churn out large numbers of items such as containers for workers' wages and sort of the ancient forerunner of Tupperware, according to Dave Goodman, a doctoral candidate in the art and archaeology of the Mediterranean at the University of Pennsylvania. Next, we have writing. According to Philip Jones, associate curator and keeper of the Babylonian section at the Penn Museum in Philadelphia, that it's likely, though not 100% certain, that the Sumerians were the first to develop a writing system. Either way, it's clear that they were using written communication by 2800s BC. But they didn't set out to write great literature or record their history, but rather to keep track of the goods that they were making and selling. Scribes used sharpened reeds to scratch the symbols into wet clay, which dried to form tablets. The system of writing became known as cuneiform. Next, we have the hydraulic engineering. The Sumerians figured out how to collect and channel the overflow of the Tigris and Euphrates River and the rich of silt that it contained, and then use it to water and fertilize their farm fields. They designed a complex systems of canals with dams constructed of reeds, pump trunks, and mud whose gates could be opened or closed to regulate the flow of water. Next, we have the chariot. According to Robert Bullitt, the Sumerians didn't invent a wheeled vehicles, but they probably developed the first two-wheeled chariot in which a driver drove a team of animals. Goodman says that there's evidence that Sumerians had such carts for ceremonies or by the military rather than as a means to get around the countryside, where the rough terrain would have made wheeled travel difficult. Next, we have the plow. According to Kramer, the Sumerians invented the plow, a vital technology in farming. They even produced a manual that gave farmers detailed instructions on how to use various types of plows. And they specified the prayer that should be recited to pay homage to Ninkilim, the goddess of field, in order to protect the grain from being eaten. Next, we have textile mills. Goodman explains that the Sumerians' innovation was to turn their temples into huge factories. He notes that the Sumerians were the first to cross Achaean lines and form larger working organizations for making textiles, the predecessors of modern manufacturing companies. Next, we have the mass-produced bricks. To make up for a shortage of stones and timber for building houses and temples, the Sumerians created molds for making bricks out of clay, according to Kramer. Their buildings might not have been as durable as stone ones, but they were able to build more of them and create larger cities. Next, we have the metallurgy. The Sumerians were some of the earliest people to use copper to make useful items, ranging from spearheads to chisels and razors, according to the Copper Development Association. They also made art with copper, including dramatic panels depicting fantastical animals such as an eagle with a lion's head. According to Kramer, Sumerian metallurgists used furnaces heated by weights and controlled the temperature with bellows that could be worked with their hands or feet. The last is mathematics. It was the Sumerians who developed a formal numbering system based on units of 60 according to Robert E. and Caroline Krebs' book. At first, they were reeds to keep track of the units, but eventually with the development of cuneiform, they used vertical marks on the clay tablets, and their system helped lay the groundwork for the mathematical calculations of civilizations that followed. The Sumerian people of Mesopotamia had a flair of innovation, and that's how they left their mark. That's all for my topic. Thank you, everyone.